Hi! So this week we are going to be reading Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. She was an author that I saw um, a lot of times in my childhood, but I don't think I ever read one of her books. I believe that she might be the author of the Aragon the Dragon books, but I'm not exactly sure. I know she is the author of The Thief Lord. I did not read that, but I heard many people talk about it. It's a very good book. Okay, I'm going to read you guys the blurb now. Imagine if it were possible to bring the characters from a book to life. Not like when someone reads a book with such enchantment that the characters seem to jump off the pages and into your bedroom, but for real. Imagine they could actually climb out of the pages and into our world. Then imagine if those characters brought their world into ours. One cruel night, young Maggie's father, Mo, reads aloud from Inkheart, an evil ruler named Capricorn escapes the boundaries of fiction and lands in their living room. Suddenly, Maggie is smack in the middle of the kind of adventure she has only read about in books. Somehow, Maggie and Mo must learn to harness the magic that conjured this nightmare. Somehow, they must change the course of their story that has changed their lives forever. Chapter 1. A Stranger in the Night. Rain fell that night, a fine whispering rain. Many years later, Maggie had only to close her eyes and she could still hear it, like tiny fingers tapping on the window pane. A dog barks. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. Sorry. Okay, I'll continue. A dog barked somewhere in the darkness, and however often she tossed and turned, Maggie couldn't get to sleep. The book she had been reading was under her pillow, pressing its cover against her ear as if to lure her back into its printed pages. I'm sure it must be very comfortable sleeping with a hard rectangular thing like that under your head, her father had teased her the first time he found a book under her pillow. Go on, admit it. The book whispers its story to you at night. Sometimes, yes, Maggie had said, but it only works for children, which made Mo tweak her nose. Mo. Maggie had never called her father anything else. That night, when so much began and so many things changed forever, Maggie had one of her favorite books under her pillow, and since the rain wouldn't let her sleep, she sat up, rubbed the drowsiness from her eyes, and took it out. Its pages rustled promisingly when she opened it. Maggie thought this first whisper sounded a little different from one book to another, depending on whether or not she'd already knew the story it was going to tell her. But she needed light. She had a box of matches hidden in the drawer of her bedside table. Mo had forbidden her to light the candles at night. He didn't like fire. Fire devours books, he always said, but she was 12 years old, and she could be trusted to keep an eye on a couple of candle flames. Maggie loved to read by candlelight. She had 5 candlesticks on the windsill, and she was just holding the lighted match to one of the black wicks when she heard footsteps outside. She blew the match out in alarm. Oh, how well she remembered it, even many years later, and knelt to look out the window, which was wet with rain. Then she saw him. The rain cast a kind of pallor on the darkness, and the stranger was a little more than a shadow. Only his face gleamed white as he looked up at Maggie. His hair clung to his wet forehead. The rain was falling on him, but he ignored it. He stood there, motionless, arms crossed over his chest as if that might at least warm him a little. And he kept on staring at the house. I must go and wake Mo, thought Maggie, but she stayed put, her heart thudding, and went on gazing out into the night as if the stranger's stillness had infected her. Suddenly he turned his head, and Maggie felt as if he were looking straight into her eyes. She shot off the bed so fast the open book fell to the floor, and she ran barefoot out into the dark corridor. This was the end of May, but it was chilly in the old house. There was still light on in Mo's room. He often stayed up reading late into the night. Maggie had inherited her love of books from her father. When she took refuge from a bad dream with him, nothing could lull her to sleep better than Mo's calm breathing beside her and the sound of the pages turning. Nothing chased nightmares away faster than the rustling of printed paper. But the figure outside the house was no dream. The book Mo was reading that night was bound in pale blue linen. Later, Maggie remembered that too. What important little details stick in the memory. Mo, there's someone out in the yard! Her father raised his head and looked at her with the usual absent expression he wore when she interrupted his reading. It always took him a few moments to find his way out of that other world in the labyrinth of printed letters. "Someone out in the yard? Are you sure?" "Yes, he's staring at our house." Mo put down the book. "So what were you reading before you went to sleep? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?" Maggie frowned. "Please, Mo, come and look." He didn't believe her, but he went anyway. Maggie tugged him along the corridor so impatiently that he stubbed his toe on a pile of books, which was hardly surprising. Stacks of books were piled high all over the house, not just arranged in neat rows on bookshelves, the way other people kept them. Oh, no! The books in Mo and Maggie's house were stacked under tables, on chairs, and in the corners of the room. There were books in the kitchen and books in the lavatory. Books on the TV set and in the closet. Small piles of books, tall piles of books. Books thick and thin. Books old and new. They welcomed Maggie down to the breakfast with invitingly open pages, and they kept boredom at bay when the weather was bad. And sometimes you fell over them. "He's just standing there," whispered Maggie, leading Mo into her room. "Has he got a hairy face? If so, could he be a werewolf?" "Oh, stop it!" Maggie looked at him sternly, although his jokes made her feel less scared. Already she had hardly believed any more in the figure standing in the rain, until she knelt down at the window. "There! Do you see him?" she whispered. Mo looked out through the raindrops running down the pane and said nothing. "Didn't you promise burglars would never break into our house because there's nothing here to steal?" whispered Maggie. "He's not a burglar," replied Mo, but he stepped back from the window. His face was so grave that Maggie's heart thudded faster than ever. "Go back to bed, Maggie," he said. "This visitor has come to see me." He left the room before Maggie could ask what kind of visitor, for goodness sake, turned up in the middle of the night. She followed him anxiously. As she crept down to the corridor, she heard her father taking the chain off the front door, and when she reached down the hall, she saw him standing in the open doorway. The night came in, dark and damp, and the rushing of rain sounded loud and threatening. "Dustfinger!" called Mo into the darkness. "Is that you?" Dustfinger? What kind of name was that? Maggie couldn't remember ever hearing it before, yet it sounded familiar, like a distant memory that wouldn't shape properly. At first, all seemed still outside, except for the rain falling, murmuring as if the night had found its voice. But then, footsteps approached the house, and the man emerged from the darkness of the yard, his long coat so wet with rain that it clung to his legs. For a split second, the stranger stepped into the light spilling out of his house. Maggie thought she saw a small furry head over his shoulder, snuffling as it looked out of his backpack, and then quickly disappearing back into it. Dustfinger wiped his wet face with a sleeve and offered Mo his hand. "How are you, Silver Tongue?" he asked. "It's been a long time." Hesitantly, Mo took the outstretched hand. "A very long time," he said, looking past his visitor as if he expected to see another figure emerge from the night. "Come in. You'll catch your death. Maggie says you've been standing out there for a long time." "Maggie? Ah, yes, of course." Dustfinger let Mo lead him into the house. He scrutinized Maggie so thoroughly she felt quite embarrassed and didn't know where to look. In the end, she just stared back. "She's grown. You remember her?" "Of course." Maggie noticed that Mo double-locked the door. "How old is she now?" Dustfinger smiled at her. It was a strange smile. Maggie couldn't decide whether it was mocking, supercilious, or just awkward. She didn't smile back. 12, said Mo. 12! My word! Dustfinger pushed his dripping hair back from his forehead. It reached almost to his shoulders. Maggie wondered what color it was when it was dry. The stubble around his narrow-lit mouth was gingery, like the fur of the stray cat Maggie sometimes fed with a saucer of milk outside the door. Ginger hair sprouted on his cheeks, too, sparse as a boy's first beard, but not long enough to hide 3 long pale scars. They made Dustfinger's face look as if it had been smashed and stuck back together again. 12, he repeated. Of course, but she was, let's see, she was 3 then, wasn't she? Mo nodded. Come on, I'll buy you a dry set of clothes. Impatiently, as if he were suddenly in a hurry to hide the man from Maggie, he led his visitor across the hall. And Maggie, he said over his shoulder, you go back to sleep. Then without another word he closed his workshop door. Maggie stood there, rubbing her cold feet together. Go back to sleep. Sometimes they'd stay up late. When they'd stay up late again, Mo would toss her down in her bed like a bag of walnuts. Sometimes he chased her around the room, breathless with laughter. And sometimes he was so tired he'd lay down on the sofa, and she made him a cup of coffee before she went to bed. But she had never ever sent her off to the room so brusquely. Brusquely. Huh, okay. A foreboding, clammy and fearful, came into her heart, as if, along with the visitor whose name was so strange yet somehow familiar, some menace had slipped into her life, and she wished, so hard it frightened her, that she had never gone to Mow and Dustfinger, and had stayed outside until the rain washed away. When the door of the workshop opened again, she jumped. "Still there, I see," said Mo. "Go to bed, Maggie, please." He had that little frown over his nose that appeared only when something was really worrying him, and he seemed to look straight through her as if his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The foreboding in Maggie's heart grew, spreading black wings. "Send him away, Mo!" she said as he gently propelled her toward her room. "Please send him away. I don't like him." Mo leaned in her open doorway. "He'll be gone when you get up in the morning. Word of honor." "Word of honor? No crossed fingers?" Maggie looked him straight in the eye. She could always tell when Mo was lying, however hard he tried to hide it from her. "No crossed fingers," he said, holding both his hands out to show her. Then he closed her door, even though she knew she didn't like that. Maggie put her ear to it, listening. She could hear the clink of china. So the man with the sandy beard was getting a nice cup of tea to warm him up. "I hope he catches pneumonia," thought Maggie, though he needn't necessarily die of it. Maggie heard the kettle whistling in the kitchen, and Mo carrying a tray of clattering crockery back to the workshop. When the door closed, she forced herself to wait for a few more seconds just to be on the safe side. Then she crept back out into the hallway. There was a sign hanging on the door of Mo's workshop, a small metal plaque. Maggie knew the words on it by heart. When she was 5, she had often practiced reading the old-fashioned spindly lettering. Some books should be tasted, some devoured, but only a few should be chewed and digested thoroughly. Back when she still had to climb on a box to read that plaque, she had thought the chewing and the digesting were meant literally, and wondered, horrified, why Mo had hung on his workshop door the words of someone who vandalized books. Now she knew what the plaque really meant. But tonight she wasn't interested in written words. Spoken words were what she wanted to hear, the words being exchanged in soft, almost inaudible whispers by the two men on the other side of the door. "Don't underestimate him," she heard Dustfinger say. His voice was so different from Mo's. No one else in the world had a voice like her father's. Mo could paint pictures in the empty air with his voice alone. "He'd do anything to get a hold of it." That was Dustfinger again. "And when I say anything, I can assure you I mean anything." "I'll never let him have it." That was Mo. "He'll still get his hands on it one way or another. I tell you, they're on your trail." "It wouldn't be the first time. I've always managed to shake them off before." "Oh, yes? And for how much longer, do you think? What about your daughter? Are you telling me she actually likes moving around the whole time? Believe me, I know what I'm talking about." It was so quiet behind the door that Maggie scarcely dared to breathe in case the two men heard her again. Finally her father spoke again, hesitantly as if his tongue found it difficult to form the words. "Then what do you think I ought to do?" "Come with me. I'll take you to them." A cup clinked, the sound of a spoon against china. How loud small noises sound in silence. "You know how much Capricorn thinks of your talents. He'd be glad if you took it to him of your own free will. I'm sure he would. The man he found to replace you is useless." Capricorn, another peculiar name. Dustfinger had uttered it as if the mere sound might scorch his tongue. Maggie wriggled her chilly toes and wrinkled her cold nose. She didn't understand much of what was going on, but she tried to memorize every single word of what they were saying. It was quiet again in the workshop. "Oh, I don't know," said Mo at last. He sounded so weary it tore at Maggie's heart. "I'll have to think about it. When do you think his men will get here?" "Soon." The word dropped like a stone into the silence. "Soon," repeated Mo. "Very well. I've made up my mind by tomorrow." "So that's going to be the end?" And I hope you enjoyed it. And again, this is called Inkheart if you want to read this. And bye. See you next week.